At a welcome home dinner, Wesley saw Ethan again. He was now a titan of industry, a coveted name in the business world, no longer the tense, penniless boy from college. He was, in fact, Wesley's largest potential investor. The project lead, unaware of their history, was working tirelessly to lubricate the conversation, desperate to seal the deal. During the meal, he happened to mention their shared alma mater, commenting that he'd heard Mr. Thorne and Mr. Vance both attended Northwood and wondered if they had known each other back then. Wesley answered with a practiced calm, stating that they had never met. After he spoke, Ethan's head lifted, an almost imperceptible motion. Wesley didn't meet his gaze. From the moment he had walked in and seen Ethan, he knew the partnership was probably doomed. After all, Ethan had despised him so intensely all those years ago. As dinner concluded, the project lead posed the critical question, asking Mr. Thorne for his final thoughts on the proposal. Ethan shifted in his seat, his eyes fixed directly on Wesley. The silence stretched. Wesley braced himself for the inevitable rejection. But the next sound he heard was a cool, clear voice. He said he agreed. Was he serious? Wesley mentally replayed the words, certain he must have misheard. After receiving confirmation, the project lead was ecstatic, pouring several glasses of whiskey for Wesley and proposing a toast to their future success. Wesley stood to raise his glass, but as their glasses were about to touch, a hand closed around his wrist. It was an instinctive gesture from Ethan. He had long ago developed the habit of running interference for Wesley, whose tolerance for alcohol was notoriously low. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. Gradually, under the curious stares of everyone at the table, his grip slackened. He knew he no longer had any right. In the end, Wesley drank every glass left on the table. While waiting for a car on the street corner, he noticed Ethan was there too. Perhaps it was the alcohol coursing through him, but for a moment, he thought he saw Ethan running toward him. Wesley, just as Ethan called his name, Julian's car pulled up to the curb. Wesley had just opened the door when Ethan caught his arm, stopping him. Julian rolled down the window, his voice laced with affection. He asked his baby if he was getting in. In the next instant, the rims of Ethan's eyes were tinged with red, his grip on Wesley's arm tightening. He pleaded in a small, careful voice, asking if Wesley was really leaving him. In college, Wesley had been captivated by Ethan from the first glance. He saw him standing there in a simple white button-down, tall and slender, with a clean, gentle aura that seemed entirely out of place in the noisy chaos of freshman orientation. When Ethan bent his head to sign a form, the long, pale column of his neck was exposed, reminding Wesley of a proud, solitary swan. He wanted him, and so, without a second thought, he dove in. He had friends ask around, gathering intelligence on Ethan's habits and schedule, hoping for an opportunity to get close. But Ethan was a frustratingly solitary person, with few friends to speak of. His life was a Spartan routine of classes and long hours in the library. Fortunately, Wesley was nothing if not persistent. A notorious slacker, he suddenly became a fixture in the university library, textbooks in hand, all for the sake of pursuing Ethan. He always chose a seat near him, passing notes under the guise of asking about difficult problem sets. Ethan, ever decent, would write out detailed solutions for even the most foolish of Wesley's questions. Through this exchange of paper, they became, in a way, library pen pals. The more time he spent observing him, the more Wesley realized the extent of Ethan's financial struggles. He seemed to survive on one meal a day from the dining hall, never bought snacks, and worked with worn, secondhand books. He didn't even own a laptop. Wesley, smitten as he was, couldn't bear to see him go hungry. He escalated his campaign, following Ethan to the dining hall and always ordering an extra plate of food, which he would then push toward Ethan with a clumsy pretense of having overestimated his own appetite. He would also sneak protein bars and bags of trail mix into Ethan's backpack when he wasn't looking. After a full week of this, Ethan finally caught on. Over lunch one afternoon, he broke their usual silence, his voice quiet as he asked Wesley why he was doing all of this. Wesley, in the middle of casually placing a piece of fried chicken from his plate onto Ethan's, replied that he thought he had been rather obvious. Ethan still seemed confused, murmuring that he didn't understand. Wesley was forthright, asking if he really couldn't tell. He was trying to date him. In his youthful naivete, he didn't know seduction required subtlety. And just like that, he scared him away. For the next few days, Ethan was absent from the library. Wesley waited and waited, but a full week passed without a single sighting. Finally, dejected, he went to a local dive bar to drown his sorrows, only to find Ethan there, working as a busboy. Buoyed by liquid courage, he approached him directly, asking why he had stopped coming to the library. Ethan seemed startled to see him and instinctively took a step back. The small movement stung Wesley. Ethan explained that he had found a part-time job and needed to work. Hidden in the bar's dim lighting, his expression was unreadable. Wesley sat at the bar, fidgeting with his fingers. He had never been a timid person, but at that moment, he felt a wave of hesitation. He finally forced himself to ask if Ethan had considered what he had said the other day. Time seemed to freeze for 10 seconds. Then, after a moment, Ethan resumed polishing a glass with a calm, steady hand. His voice even as he said he hadn't considered it, and he wouldn't say yes. Another pang shot through Wesley's chest. His cheeks were flushed with alcohol and embarrassment, but he pressed on, asking if it was because he didn't like men, or if he just didn't like him. Ethan finished with the glass and stepped out of the shadows. His face was as placid as ever, betraying no emotion. He said he didn't like him. Wesley's retreat was graceless. A wave of nausea rolled in his stomach, as if his body understood his misery and wanted to purge the hurt. He stumbled out of the bar and collapsed under a large oak tree on the sidewalk. When he managed to regain some focus, he found himself surrounded by several large, menacing figures. He heard their coarse remarks, one speculating he was some rich kid, another suggesting he was a rent boy from the club. One of them mused that he had never been with a man before and, seeing as they were alone, wondered if a little touch would matter. A greasy hand reached for him. Wesley tried to struggle to get up, but his limbs were heavy and useless. He cursed himself for drinking such strong liquor. The man pinned him down, his fingers stroking Wesley's jaw while his other hand crept toward the hem of his shirt. Just as he was about to lift it, a hand with long, distinct knuckles shot out and yanked him away. "Get lost." The voice wasn't loud, but it was potent. The men, however, were seasoned barflies and not easily intimidated. Almost without hesitation, they swung their fists at Ethan. The scene devolved into chaos. Wesley, emboldened by the alcohol, tried to join the fight, but before he could even raise a fist, he was lifted by the collar of his shirt. Ethan held him like a stray kitten and deposited him into a nearby car, locking the door for good measure. The sounds of the fight continued outside, but Wesley couldn't pry the door open. The brawl only ended when the bar's owner intervened. A long while later, Ethan finally remembered Wesley was still in the car. Even through his swimming vision, Wesley could see that he was injured. On instinct, he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, gently took Ethan's hand, and began carefully dressing the wound. Ethan didn't resist. Emboldened, Wesley blew softly on the scrapes. A comforting gesture he remembered his family's butler performing when he was a child. He was too drunk at the time to notice the flicker of surprise and restraint in Ethan's eyes. In the end, Ethan had no choice but to take him home. As Wesley clung to his back, he whispered, asking if he really didn't like him. Ethan's reply was a simple no. Wesley pressed, questioning why he would carry him then. Ethan's response was that it was just a sense of civic duty. Wesley would later learn that Ethan was fired from the bar because of him. When he heard the news, he was consumed by a mixture of guilt and a painful ache in his chest. But the tiny flame of hope that had been extinguished now flickered back to life. It had to mean that Ethan cared at least a little. He couldn't just let this go. He saw Ethan next at the hospital. He was standing in a corridor, head bowed, pleading with a man. He was explaining that his grandmother's surgery fees were still short and asking if there was any way. The man cut him off, waving his hands dismissively, claiming his wife controlled all the finances and he had no money to spare. Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with contempt. The surrounding people began to whisper and stare. The man, unable to bear the scrutiny, made a show of throwing a few crumpled bills at Ethan's face. He said that was all he could do and told him not to come looking for him again. Muttering under his breath about the bad luck the old woman brought and how the kid was no better. Ethan seemed accustomed to it, silently bending down to pick up the money. He looked more worn down than ever before. Wesley's heart softened, and he walked over. When Ethan saw him, a flash of panic crossed his face. At the time, Wesley was too young to understand what Ethan was afraid of. All he knew was that Ethan was in trouble, and he had to help him. So he made his offer, asking Ethan if he would let him help, and in return, if he would be with him. Ethan froze. The expression on his face at that moment was anything but joyful. It was years before Wesley understood what he had seen. A quiet, agonizing display of pride and humiliation. His grandmother's surgery was a success. Ethan returned to campus from the hospital, and they were, for all intents and purposes, together. Ethan would now save him a seat in the library. He agreed to eat meals with him, and he no longer recoiled from Wesley's proximity. Beyond that, though, he remained distant. If Wesley didn't initiate conversation, they could go an entire day without speaking. Wesley knew that Ethan still didn't truly like him. He would buy Ethan the most expensive birthday gifts and take him to the finest restaurants. Ethan refused at first, but eventually gave in to Wesley's relentless coaxing. It was a bitter truth that a prize won through force was never sweet. Wesley only knew how to be good to him in his own way. He never stopped to ask if it was what Ethan wanted. One Friday evening, Wesley went to find Ethan at his dorm, only to discover his bed was empty. Ethan had moved out. As he was leaving the room, he overheard the mocking tones of his roommates. They were speculating about some rich benefactor, remarking on how lavishly Ethan had been living lately. They guessed he moved out because he was ashamed of being exposed. They were glad he was gone, saying it was better for the department's reputation. They called him shameless on top of being poor. The words struck Wesley like a bolt of lightning. He quickly pulled out his phone. A headline? Deep dive. Northwood's campus prince, Ethan Thorne, and his sugar daddy, was trending on the school's online forum. The thread had thousands of replies, most of them filled with vile speculation and insults. All this time, Ethan had been enduring this vitriol and had never said a word to him. Guilt and fear washed over Wesley as he frantically searched for him. He sent a text asking Ethan where he was. The message went unanswered for what felt like an eternity. In a panic, he called in a favor to find his location. When he arrived, knocking on the door in the pouring rain, the look on Ethan's face was colder than anything he had ever seen. The chill from outside seemed to seep into the room, and Wesley shivered. "I'm sorry," he said. "Are we breaking up?" Their voices overlapped. Wesley's throat closed up. His heart felt as though it had been kicked into an icy river, cold and aching. The rain continued to beat against the window pane. Before he could finish, Ethan suddenly pulled him into a fierce embrace. Wesley was pressed against his warm chest, and Ethan's hand came up to stroke his back comfortingly. His voice was softer now as he admitted he was just kidding. He told him it was cold outside and to come in. The frantic heart in his chest, which had just taken a plunge, slowly floated back to its rightful place. Wesley pulled back slightly, whispering his apology again. Ethan didn't reject it, which Wesley took as acceptance. He made a promise, telling him he would never treat him like that again. He said he would clear things up and stop bothering him on campus. He added that he hoped Ethan would also honor their arrangement. He deliberately sidestepped Ethan's not-so-joking question. Ethan watched him for a long moment, his voice raspy as he agreed. Wesley breathed a sigh of relief. The next day, all the posts were gone. Wesley had used his influence to suppress all the rumors about Ethan. But Ethan still didn't move back to the dorm. Wesley thought he had successfully placated him. And so, he started showing up at Ethan's rental apartment frequently. The place was small and old, a testament to Ethan's limited budget. Wesley stopped buying him expensive gifts, but he could help him fix up the place, make it comfortable, warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Gradually, the apartment filled with a PlayStation, model race cars, all sorts of snacks, and Lego sets. It was only after a while that Wesley realized these were all things that he liked. Ethan never commented, but he didn't seem angry either. One night, Wesley was playing games so late that he fell asleep. When he woke up the next morning, he was in Ethan's arms. Over time, it seemed Ethan had tacitly accepted that they were living together. On Wesley's birthday, Ethan met his friends for the first time. He sat quietly beside Wesley in the upscale restaurant. Wesley was thrilled to introduce him to his circle, and they all readily accepted Ethan as his boyfriend. In their world, it wasn't unusual for people to have same-sex partners, though such relationships were often fleeting and rarely brought into formal settings. But Ethan was different. Wesley wanted him to know he was important. As the night wore on, many people came to offer birthday toasts. At first, Wesley could keep up, but he was quickly becoming overwhelmed. Then, a hand closed over his wrist, taking the glass from his fingers. Ethan's eyes were dark, his voice low as he said he would drink for him. The table erupted in a chorus of knowing, ambiguous laughter. More and more drinks were pushed in front of Wesley, and Ethan accepted every single one. The others seemed even more excited than Wesley, some even shouting for them to kiss for the crowd. Ethan's face was flushed, his lips glistening with liquor. Wesley leaned on his chair, cautiously moving closer. Ethan suddenly looked down, his expression complicated as he stared at him. Wesley, emboldened, continued his approach. Just an inch away from their lips meeting, someone called his name. Wes? Ethan's eyes cleared, and he quickly turned his head away. Wesley turned, annoyed at the interruption, but his irritation turned to surprise when he saw who it was. He exclaimed Julian's name. Julian was leaning lazily against the doorframe, waiting for Wesley to rush into his arms as he always did. Wesley shot up from his seat, but stopped short just before embracing him. He instinctively glanced back at Ethan, but Ethan wasn't looking at him. Julian seemed surprised by his hesitation, ruffling Wesley's hair himself. He teased that he was all grown up now, not even inviting him to his own birthday. Wesley pulled his hand away, explaining with a fawning smile that he didn't know Julian was back in the country. He insisted that if he had known, he would have been the first one at the airport to greet him. Julian just shook his head, smiling, and took a seat beside him naturally. Everyone at the table knew Julian and made sure to exchange pleasantries. Wesley had grown up with Julian, who had doted on him more than his own father. He was practically family. So Wesley felt Julian should know. "Julian," he said, "this is my boyfriend." At this, Julian looked at Ethan with a flicker of interest. He offered a hello. Ethan nodded slightly in return. After that, they had no further interaction. Toward the end of the night, a waiter brought out a cake, along with a gift from the restaurant. It was a new model of a Cartier men's watch. Ethan stared at the watch, his face slowly draining of color. After the waiter left, Julian presented his gift. It was a limited ion model race car, one of Wesley's favorites, nearly impossible to find in the States. Wesley excitedly tinkered with the model, completely missing the fact that Ethan had quietly slipped away from the table. Julian glanced in the direction he'd gone and followed him out. Ethan had just reached the restroom when Julian walked in. They looked at each other in the mirror, a silent battle of wills passing between them. Julian asked if his name was Ethan. Ethan nodded. Julian turned on the faucet, the sound of rushing water masking their conversation. He stated that Ethan was Wesley's boyfriend because he had helped him, and yet he hadn't even prepared a birthday gift for him. He asked if he didn't feel ashamed. Ethan's hand tightened around a small box in his pocket. He said nothing. Julian, a veteran of the business world, easily saw through Ethan's fragile composure. He continued, asking if he knew anything about Wesley's family, what he liked or disliked, or if he could give him the life he wanted. Ethan's eyes reddened, a trace of defiance in his voice as he retorted that it was Wesley who had pursued him first. Julian let out a small laugh, acknowledging that Wesley was indeed quite taken with him. But he pointed out that Wesley had been passionate about many things before. Racing, equestrianism, anything that gave him a thrill. He would spend vast amounts of time and money on these interests without a second thought. But, Julian noted, his greatest weakness was his fleeting attention span. His favorite car, he had only been obsessed with it for a year. He wondered aloud how long his interest in Ethan would last. Ethan's face grew paler and paler. Julian watched his shifting expression with cool detachment. Finally, he turned off the water and dried his hands. He asked if Wesley had the capital to play these games, but did he? His final words were "It was best not to covet what wasn't yours." After Julian left, Ethan remained in the restroom for a long time. He took the box out of his pocket. Inside was a watch identical to the one from the restaurant. The only difference was the underside, engraved with Wesley's initials. He traced the letters carefully, afraid the calluses on his fingers would scratch the surface. In that moment, all his recent efforts felt like a bitter joke. All the sleepless nights spent working and studying had only been enough to bring him to Wesley's starting line. By the time Ethan returned, most of the guests had left. He silently helped Wesley gather his things. As they were leaving the restaurant, Wesley couldn't help but ask if there was no gift. Ethan looked down, his voice cold as he said there wasn't. In that instant, Wesley knew he wasn't joking. It was a lie to say he wasn't disappointed. He quietly let go of Ethan's hand. Just then, the sky opened up in a torrential downpour. The ride-sharing app showed no drivers available. For a long time, Ethan didn't take his hand again. The temperature dropped, and Wesley let out a sneeze. Ethan took off his jacket and draped it over his shoulders. Wesley held his hand, asking in a small voice if, instead of a gift, he could have a wish. He explained that you were supposed to get 3 wishes on your birthday, and he still had 1 left. Ethan went along with it, asking what he wished for. Wesley looked up, his eyes shining with a single, hopeful request. He asked if he could have a kiss. A deep blush spread across Ethan's face. He didn't speak. Wesley took his silence as consent. Bolstered by the alcohol, he leaned in and kissed him. It was a brief, light touch over in a second. He studied Ethan's expression, which didn't seem to show any revulsion. Ethan's throat moved as he swallowed, his voice raspy when he spoke. "Be greedier." Wesley didn't catch it and asked him what he'd said. The next second, Ethan cupped the back of his head and kissed him again. This time, it was anything but brief. As their lips and tongues tangled, Wesley heard his muffled voice. "Please, be greedier." Content, Wesley wrapped his arms around his waist. A light spring rain mixed with the breeze, falling softly around them. Ethan's kisses trailed to his earlobe. Wesley heard him whisper, "Wes, happy birthday." After the birthday, Ethan became even busier. He was starting his own business venture. Sometimes, he wouldn't get back to their apartment until the early hours of the morning. As Ethan's grandmother's health improved, Wesley visited her often. She was a kind, gentle woman who would teach them how to make pierogies during holidays and cook him his favorite comfort foods. She reminded him of his own mother, who had passed away when he was young. He hadn't felt that kind of warmth in a long time. Of course, she knew nothing of his and Ethan's true relationship. People of her generation, it seemed, were not always accepting of such things. Ethan's business began to take off, and their time in college was drawing to a close. Wesley naively believed they were in love. Until the day a pretty, vivacious young woman appeared in the hospital room. Ethan's grandmother held her hand warmly, listening as she chattered on. After Wesley entered, She called him over, introducing him to Chloe, Ethan's neighbor from back home. Chloe smiled sweetly, asking if he was the Wesley she had heard so much about from Ethan's grandmother. Wesley nodded, offering a polite hello. Chloe quickly turned her attention back to the old woman. 10 minutes later, Ethan arrived. The moment Chloe saw him, she leaped up and threw herself at him. Ethan, his hands full, couldn't avoid her. She clung to his arm, exclaiming how long it had been. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but Chloe didn't let go. He finally had to warn her sternly with her name. Chloe pouted and released him, complaining to his grandmother about how he was still so grumpy. Ethan put down his things and began peeling an apple. Chloe sat down beside him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Wesley sat on the other side, listening as they reminisced about a past he knew nothing about. For the first time, he felt completely out of place. Ethan kept his head down, only occasionally murmuring a response. Then Chloe brought up a childhood memory, asking Ethan if he remembered making her cry once and promising to marry her when they grew up to make up for it. His grandmother chimed in, saying she remembered. He was such a little rascal back then, and she had to scold him for it. Wesley instinctively looked at Ethan. His hand paused in its task, and he explained coolly that it was just a childhood joke, not to be taken seriously. This, however, turned the conversation directly onto him. His grandmother looked at him and asked earnestly if he had a girlfriend yet. Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting Wesley's, 1,000 unspoken words between them. Afraid his grandmother would sense something, Wesley quickly turned away. Ethan's gaze dropped. "No," he said. His grandmother sighed, telling him not to let an old woman like her hold him back. Chloe jumped in at the perfect moment, reassuring her not to worry, that she would be there to keep Ethan company. They continued to chat, but Wesley felt he was no longer part of the conversation and quietly excused himself. That night, Ethan came home very late. He was still awake when Ethan wrapped his arms around him in bed. Ethan probably guessed what was on his mind, but he was too exhausted to offer any explanation. Wesley later found out that Ethan and Chloe had indeed been the subject of a childhood engagement pact. Chloe's family had been very kind to Ethan and his grandmother when they were young. But after her father passed away unexpectedly and her mother remarried, the matter was forgotten. Now, however, Chloe had also been accepted to Northwood, and the two families were growing close again. And it was clear that Ethan's grandmother adored her. On a Friday with no classes, Wesley decided to visit the hospital. As he was getting into his car, he ran into Chloe. She tapped on his window, asking if she could catch a ride. He couldn't very well refuse her, so he nodded. The second Chloe got in the car, her entire demeanor changed. She knew about his relationship with Ethan. Wesley slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road. Chloe continued, saying she had seen the campus forum posts and knew he was the one. She demanded to know what he wanted. She turned to him, her face a mask of righteous indignation, and told him to let Ethan go. She insisted Ethan didn't like him. She accused him of using his grandmother's illness to threaten Ethan into a relationship, asserting that he wasn't even gay and that people like Wesley who forced themselves on others were disgusting. The barrage of accusations left Wesley reeling. Chloe grew more agitated, her eyes filled with scorn. She told him that Ethan was in the process of securing a major project. Once the deal was done, he would get a huge investment and could finally pay Wesley back. She claimed that was the only reason he had been working so hard all these years, to get away from him. She told him that if he had any shame, he would walk away on his own. Otherwise, if Ethan's grandmother found out about them and had another health scare, it would be his fault. After all, not everyone was a pervert like him. With that, Chloe slammed the car door and stormed off. Wesley's hands gripped the steering wheel, and he remained parked there for a long time. Was that really how Ethan felt? He didn't go to the hospital that day. Instead, he went back to the bar where he had first met Ethan and ran into Julian. Julian swapped out his drink for something with less alcohol, asking if something was on his mind. Wesley clutched his glass, tentatively asking if he thought Ethan had ever liked him. Julian asked if they were having relationship troubles. Wesley just shook his head, admitting he didn't know. Julian offered to help him sort it out. He asked him, had Ethan ever said he liked him? Wesley's mind flashed to that first night in the bar, to Ethan's words, "I don't like you." He shook his head. No. Had he told his friends or family about their relationship? Ethan's grandmother didn't know. He shook his head again. No. Had Ethan ever planned a future with him? No. There was no need for more questions. The answer was obvious. When Wesley got home, Ethan was there for a change. As he walked past, he heard Ethan ask if he had gone to see Julian. Wesley nodded dismissively, saying he needed to talk to him about something. Ethan's face darkened, but he didn't press the issue. The next morning, Wesley received a text from his father asking if he had made a decision about going abroad. He held the phone for a long moment before replying with a single word. Yes. Then he began to pack. He was so distracted that he walked out of the apartment and forgot his keys. He had no choice but to go to the campus to find Ethan. He eventually located him in a classroom. Just as he was about to enter, he saw Chloe was there too. The next thing he heard was Ethan's voice, asking who would ever like a man. It was followed by Chloe's bright, tinkling laughter. Wesley turned and walked away. He wouldn't be going back for his things. They could stay there. Because of a request from his family, Julian had been helping him with the arrangements. It turned out he had business overseas as well and planned to leave at the same time. Ethan had been away on a business trip. By the day before his departure, they still hadn't seen each other. On the way to the airport, Wesley saw a post on Chloe's social media feed. "Thanks, E, for taking time out of your busy schedule to see a movie with me." The accompanying photo was of her arm linked with someone else's. Strangely, he felt a sense of calm seeing it. He efficiently blocked her number and then called Ethan. "Ethan, let's break up." There was no. He could tell Ethan was stunned. But after a long silence, he still said, "Okay." Just before he hung up, the airport's final boarding call echoed in the background. Ethan didn't know he was leaving the country. But as soon as his plane landed, Wesley received a notification from his bank. A deposit of $500,000. Ethan had paid him back every last cent. It seemed he truly couldn't wait another second to be done with him. The absurdity of the past few years had finally come to an end. Wesley had rarely seen him beg. For the most part, Ethan always wore a mask of cool indifference. But now their roles were reversed. Wesley's voice was cold as he reminded him that he was the one who had agreed to the breakup. Ethan refused to let go, insisting he didn't know Wesley was leaving. If he had known this departure would last 5 years, he would never have agreed. He had always thought they had more time, enough time for him to grow, to become stronger, to reach a point where he could stand beside him openly. But life had other plans. No one is obligated to wait forever. So what is it you want? Ethan's gaze was full of longing. For you to come back to me. His sincerity was so intense it felt unreal. The standoff dragged on until Julian lost his patience. He got out of the car, pulled Ethan away, and pushed Wesley inside. He said they were all adults and should know how to let things go gracefully. Then he got back in the car and drove off, leaving Ethan standing alone on the sidewalk. In the car, Wesley was lost in thought. He didn't snap out of it until Julian stopped at a red light and asked if he was still thinking about it. Wesley turned his head, denying it a little too quickly. Julian saw right through him, pointing out that his phone was open to Ethan's Wikipedia page. Wesley looked down, saw that it was true, and quickly shut it off. In the intervening years, Ethan's company had grown at a meteoric rate, becoming an industry leader in just a few short years. Its reach was not just national but global. Even the partner Wesley had just flown back to negotiate with was connected to him. His influence was that extensive. The car started moving again, and Julian's tone became serious. He asked if he regretted the breakup. Wesley clutched his phone tighter.
No regrets.
Do you want to get back together with him? No. Julian, satisfied, patted his head. Good man. Belated affection is cheaper than dirt. Not a loss to throw it away. Wesley didn't answer, just stared silently at the photo on his phone. He had to admit, Ethan and Chloe looked good together. To avoid further contact with Ethan, Wesley asked Julian to take over as the primary liaison for the project, a role he accepted with surprising enthusiasm. After waiting for 3 days without seeing Wesley, Ethan also delegated his side to someone else. Then, he came to find Wesley himself.
Come in.
Wesley looked up to see a travel-worn Ethan standing in his office doorway. What are you doing here? There are still some points in the proposal that need discussion. You can talk to Julian, Wesley. He cut him off abruptly. The hand at his side clenched into a fist. He spoke in a low voice. Please don't be like this. I thought I made myself perfectly clear that night. Wesley gathered his things, trying to make a quick escape, but as he brushed past, Ethan blocked his path. Wesley, I love you. He said the words with an unnerving earnestness. Wesley was forced to stop. The small office was thick with a tense, awkward silence. There was a time when he would have given anything to hear Ethan say he loved him. But now he no longer needed to. He sighed. I forced you back then. You must have hated me. After all, you said you would never like me. In his second year abroad, his father's company had faced a sudden crisis. Wesley had been forced to seek help everywhere. An investor had offered a lifeline. He thought the man was being kind, but soon discovered he was only interested in young men. He had offered his help on the condition that Wesley spend one night with him. The man's lecherous gaze had made his skin crawl. In that moment, he finally understood. Was this how Ethan had felt when faced with him all those years ago? Wesley pulled his arm free. You're just not used to me not being around anymore, Ethan. But that isn't love. No, it's not habit. He immediately refuted the claim. A shadow of sorrow crossed his face. It wasn't that I didn't like you. It was that I didn't dare to. You had the freedom to walk away at any moment, but I didn't. I was trying so hard to be worthy of you. But when I finally looked back, you were already gone. His voice cracked, and he laid his soul bare. Wesley, can you please give me one more chance? His desperate courage reminded Wesley of the boy he used to be. But not everything can be rewound. Ethan, it's too late. I'm with someone else now. I don't need you anymore. Go home. Your fiancé is waiting. Just as he finished speaking, Julian appeared at the door. Ethan left. Wesley watched his lonely figure retreat, a bitter taste in his mouth. Julian stood beside him. Does it hurt? Wesley pushed his sadness down, forcing a brave face. No. Julian glanced down. I looked into it. That Chloe woman isn't his fiancée. She just paid a PR firm to spread rumors online out of vanity. I just don't know why Ethan kept her at his company all these years. Wesley lowered his eyes. I understand, but it still doesn't change anything. Chloe's words had hurt him deeply back then, but once he had time to think clearly, he realized most of it was nonsense. The real reason he had let go was Ethan's grandmother. He remembered a day when the nurse had just finished changing her for. She wasn't resting yet. As he sat with her, she had suddenly looked at him, her expression complex. A sense of dread washed over him. The next moment, she spoke. Wesley, you two should just let it be. So, she had known all along. He felt like a child caught doing something wrong, unable to meet her gaze. She continued, her voice heavy. Ethan's first half of life had been so difficult. She didn't want. She couldn't bear for the second half to be filled with judgment and scorn. She begged him, asking if he would do this for her, for an old woman. Her eyes were filled with tears, her weathered face etched with a quiet plea. How could he refuse her? He couldn't. She knew he had a soft heart. In that moment, he knew their relationship was over. He had been too young then, too naive. He hadn't yet learned that the world did not always bend to his will. Ethan was a part of that lesson, and so was growing up. When his family's company was in crisis and his father fell ill, he had to shoulder the responsibility to face everything alone. He knew then that he could no longer afford to be the carefree boy he once was. If Julian hadn't stepped in to help, he wouldn't be where he was today. He had once asked Julian why he was helping him so much. Julian had told him that his father was a good man, and he was simply repaying a debt. He was afraid Wesley would be taken advantage of and wanted to help where he could. Wesley knew Julian had his own struggles, so they had made a pact to be each other's shield. He taught Wesley about business, and Wesley deflected his unwanted romantic attention. Wesley was actually aware that Julian had no romantic interest in him. He had accidentally discovered they played for the same team. One night, after Julian had been counseling him at a bar, Wesley saw him being pushed into a corner and kissed passionately by someone else. The man had blue hair and an aura of raw aggression, though he looked to be about Wesley's age. The strange thing was Julian didn't resist. He allowed the man's hands to slide under his shirt to stroke the lean muscle of his waist. Realizing they were about to proceed to something more intimate, Wesley had fled, bumping into a wall in his haste. The blue-haired man had glanced over, a smirk on his face as he whispered in Julian's ear about the little kid. He said something else, but Wesley didn't dare stay to listen. Of course, Julian had no idea he had witnessed any of it. In his mind, Wesley probably still saw him as a dominant alpha. Julian's frequent trips abroad after that were likely an attempt to avoid that particular entanglement. The project negotiations proceeded smoothly. With Julian as the point person, Wesley no longer saw Ethan. But after a week, Julian passed the job to a subordinate named Keith, and neither of them went to Ethan's company again. Fortunately, there weren't many face-to-face meetings required, and the collaboration was soon finalized. At the project launch event, Wesley and Ethan met again. By now, he was able to face him with professional composure. He had learned to separate his personal feelings from his work. When he saw who Ethan had chosen as his new liaison, he understood why Julian was absent. The young man with the blue hair now had black hair and wore a tailored suit, looking far more mature than before. No wonder Julian had handed off the project so quickly. Ethan was intensely focused during the press conference. They worked together like seasoned, well-matched partners. It wasn't until Wesley was speaking that a reporter suddenly veered off topic, asking about his college days. The reporter had heard rumors that Mr. Vance had been in a secret relationship back then and wanted to know if that person was Mr. Thorne. They then asked if their company's current partnership was related to that past affair. The media loved a scandal. In an instant, the entire focus of the press conference shifted. Words like kept man and coercion flew through the air, as if they demanded an explanation from him for what was a perfectly normal business deal. Then, he saw her, lurking in a corner of the room. Chloe. The press grew more aggressive, and the event descended into chaos. At some point, Ethan appeared in front of him, his voice magnetic and warm as he addressed the crowd. We were in love, but there was no coercion, no bullying, and no one was keeping anyone. We loved each other as equals. Then, and in the future, a public confession from a business magnate. The room exploded. More reporters swarmed in, surrounding them. Ethan grabbed his hand and pulled him through the throng, running toward the exit. But in the chaos, Wesley tripped and fell. The next second, there was a groaning sound from above. The massive chandelier was falling. The expected pain never came. Instead, he felt a heavy weight on top of him. Ethan had thrown himself over him. The chandelier shattered on his head, and blood pooled on the floor. When Ethan woke up in the hospital, 2 days had passed. The first thing he did as consciousness returned was to grasp for Wesley. He asked if he was there. Wesley held his hand, assuring him that he was. Ethan's eyes were filled with concern, but Wesley told him he was fine. With Julian and his assistant managing the company, the public narrative was quickly controlled, and Chloe was taken into police custody. At the mention of her name, Ethan's brow furrowed in disgust. Wesley had assumed that Ethan must have cared for her at least a little. He brought up the past, but when he mentioned the part about Ethan hating men, Ethan seemed completely baffled. When did I ever say that? Wesley cleared his throat, reminding him of what he'd said in the classroom in front of Chloe. Ethan's frown deepened as he vehemently denied it. Wesley prompted his memory, telling him it was in a classroom at the university. After thinking for a solid hour, Ethan finally recalled the incident. Chloe had said their drama club was rehearsing a play and had asked for his help running lines. He remembered thinking the dialogue was strange, so he'd stopped helping her. He never imagined she had been plotting something even back then. As for why he had kept Chloe at his company, it was partly to repay the kindness her parents had shown him and his grandmother, and partly because Chloe claimed she had news of Wesley. She had somehow gotten photos of him and used them to convince Ethan that she was still in contact with him. He had willingly believed her lies. It wasn't until 5 years later that they met again. He held Wesley tightly. "Wes, don't leave again, okay?" Wesley didn't push him away, but he didn't give him an answer either. He often thought that if their beginning hadn't been so tainted, they could have loved each other on equal footing. From the past into the future. After being discharged, Ethan still needed time to recover. He wanted to stay at Wesley's place. Wesley was about to refuse, but the thought that Ethan had been injured because of him softened his resolve. At first, Ethan was on his best behavior, but on the third day, Wesley discovered his limp was completely fake. He watched him walk perfectly across the living room, where he then accidentally discovered Wesley's secret. Ethan was holding a small box. "Wes, what's this?" Wesley snatched it from his hand in a panic. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, and then tears began to fall. The sound of them hitting the floor was the only noise in the room. "Wesley, you do still care about me." Wesley clutched the box, saying nothing. That night at the restaurant, a waiter had found the small box in the trash. The gift inside was engraved with his name. They had assumed he had dropped it accidentally and had returned it to him. So Ethan had prepared a gift that year. He just hadn't thought it was good enough to be seen. In those days, he couldn't offer Wesley any guarantees. Ethan stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Wes, I can buy you so many model cars now. I can buy that gaming company you like. I should be able to be with you now. I've missed you so much. So, please come back to me, okay?" His sorrow was so profound it infected Wesley. An image of his grandmother's tearful face flashed in his mind. I don't know. Your grandmother didn't want us to be together. She would be heartbroken." At the mention of his grandmother, Ethan fell silent. "She's gone. She passed away after you left. Grandma didn't wait for me, and you didn't wait for me. I don't have any family left. I've been alone for a very long time." Wesley froze for a moment, then slowly walked toward him. Ethan hugged him, burying his face in his neck. His tears soaked Wesley's collar. He heard him say that his grandmother wouldn't be happy to see him like this. "You have so much," he whispered. "I was always so afraid. Afraid that I was just a meaningless game to you. I tried to make myself heavier, more substantial, so you couldn't just throw me away. But I'm so stupid. I can't do anything right. I always hoped you would be greedier. I hoped you craved more than just a kiss, that you would crave my entire life. Come back, okay?" Wesley's resistance melted away. He relaxed in his arms. "Okay,